This video is sponsored by Surfshark. The trailer for Amazon's Lord of the Rings of Power has been ratioed to oblivion, and even Forbes remarked that it had underwhelmed the audience, and the powers that be did not respond well to any of this. Not well at all. Luckily for them, they had, by way of last week's Vanity Fair first look article, already provided all their friends in the entertainment media complex with the playbook on how to deal with dissident fans who refuse to fall in line. So all they had to do was sit back and wait, while lesser outlets eager to please published one hit piece after the other attacking the fans. They didn't have to wait long, and one that stood out to me is Den of Geek's article titled Lord of the Rings of Power, Why Fandom Has to Embrace Change. That's an unassuming title, but it's a real doozy, invoking not just Paul Feig's Ghostbusters, but also Rey, Finn, Rose Tico, and all your other favorites from the Star Wars sequel trilogy in general, and The Last Jedi in particular. Where attacking the audience goes, these are all classics by now, and now they're being employed to shame a brand new audience, namely the Tolkien audience. Some of them may be new to this, but be not afraid. In this editorial, we'll break down how and why this article tries to shame you, how it will twist and mix up facts and lies to this end, and most importantly, how to see through it and expose it for what it is. Over the course of this video, we'll go through what people behind Amazon Prime and Disney Plus programming may really feel about you, the audience, and to some, that is such an eye-opening as well as eye-watering experience that they may feel an urge to cancel their subscription and take to the high seas instead. Please note that this is something neither Midnight's Edge, our sponsors, nor any other affiliates condones. Not only is piracy wrong, you would be exposing yourself to endless spyware, tracking software, and other malware out there on the high seas, and that's on top of all the data that is stolen from you during all your regular browsing activities. Well, modern problems require modern solutions, and many of them can be found in a VPN, such as the one delivered by this channel's sponsor, Surfshark. A VPN, or Virtual Private Network, is a privacy protection tool which guarantees instant online safety and encrypts all data sent via the internet. On top of that, Surfshark allows you to bypass geo-blocking restrictions by changing the country you access the internet from, which also gives you access to 15 different Netflix libraries by simply changing your virtual location. Not only that, outside of the US, Star, the international version of Hulu, comes bundled with Disney Plus. If you're in the US and change your location to, say, the UK, well then you just might get that too. One of the advantages with Surfshark over many other VPN providers is that it allows one account to be used on unlimited devices. That's part of the reason why Surfshark is the VPN of our choice, and it gets even better. If you type in the code MIDNIGHT when ordering, that triggers an exclusive offer in which you now get 83% off the normal list price, plus 3 extra months for free. Surfshark also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out. Do check out the link in the description below for further details and to order. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video, and with that, let's get back to what the entertainment media really feel about those who aren't quite enthusiastic enough for Amazon's The Rings of Power, by exploring Den of Geek's article, Why Fandom Has to Embrace Change. The tone is set right there in the byline. Intransigent and reactionary fandom is nothing new, but some responses to the Lord of the Rings of Power trailer show how damaged the culture has become. There, you've already been primed for the message. You not embracing the Rings of Power is a sign that culture has become damaged. You are about to be walked through exactly why that is, but for now, you just need to know that culture is damaged, and you don't want that, do you? Then you must embrace the Rings of Power. With that, the article proper begins. In response to the trailer for Amazon's new Lord of the Rings series, there has been a negative reaction based on the fact that not everyone in the series is a white man. And right there is the angle of attack. What is more, this article assumes that you, the reader, are a white man, hence this phrasing. Sure, there have been other negative reactions too, but they've been trampled by review-bombing rage. There, they acknowledged that there are other complaints too, they're just ignoring them because they don't fit the narrative. What does fit the narrative, though, is invoking review bombing. You see, whenever the mass audience rejects something, the go-to defense is that it has been review bombed by a tiny minority. That way, they can claim that even though everyone appears to hate it, everyone really loves it, it's just being review bombed. But this time, too many fans found a pretty clever way to express their disgust. Namely, a quote from Tolkien, which has been reposted so often and in so many languages, that this article has no choice but to address it, as it is that visible. Evil is not able to create anything new. It can only distort and destroy what has been invented or made by the forces of good. This is actually a very clever quote, and one that is very difficult to refute. Especially since the Rings of Power showrunners are Bad Robot alumni, and if there is one thing Bad Robot have shown themselves adept at over the course of the past decades, it is taking on the creations of far greater creators than themselves, and utterly destroying them in the process. They did it with Star Trek, they did it with Star Wars, they're doing it to DC now, and now Lord of the Rings. The article is trying to deflect from the fact that this quote is actually pretty apt when describing Bad Robot. But all they can do is use 1984-style doublespeak to project the usage of this quote back at the fans, saying, which is, frankly, colossally lacking in self-awareness. You see, this article is trying to make you second-guess your own self-awareness. Someone here may indeed be lacking in that department, but as we shall see, it isn't us, the audience. Just to get you along for the ride, the article begins with something fairly uncontroversial, just to make you lower your defenses. The Rings of Power is an adaptation of the written word into a visual medium made in the third decade of the 21st century. It is not going to match books written in the middle of the 20th century in the same way as Peter Jackson's films don't match the books. Adaptations are affected by the change in medium and the context creative decisions are made in. They do not alter the original text and often increase its availability. Most people can go along with that, kinda sorta. The author then tries to convince you that at the time of the Peter Jackson adaptation, he was much like you are now, only he's gotten enlightened since. 20 years ago, there was a similar backlash. Actually, no there wasn't, but carrying on. Including from a teenage me, when Jackson's films made Arwen a more prominent character than in the books. Looking back, I realize my objections were based on ignorance of Tolkien's appendices and of the adaptation process in general, unexamined sexism, and entitlement. Note the implication that you are entitled for the high crime of wanting fidelity to the source material, and you're a sexist to boot. From there, it follows that you need to do better, be like the author, and become enlightened. Then, the author moves into a lengthy spiel about toxic fandom, before arriving at one of the major cornerstones of the piece. Lord of the Rings has already been co-opted by the far right. Now is when the manipulation of you, the reader, is kicked into high gear. Here it is implied that Tolkien's celebration of an apparently glorious past is deeply problematic, because it appeals to both movements and individuals of a nationalistic persuasion. Individuals who, if further described, would get this video deranked, so you'll have to understand me trying to tread gently here. You know how in Michael Moore's film, Bowling for a Certain Place, the media tried to link the shooters to musicians such as Marilyn Manson. Yeah, well, that is what this article just tried to do with Tolkien. And knowing a little bit about 2 of the 3 individuals the article referenced, I can tell you that any such implied causal connection is patently idiotic. However, the article needs to paint both Tolkien and his fans as right-wingers in order that it may properly shame you. Given its previous connections with fascism and the response to Peter Jackson's films, it's sadly not surprising to see Lord of the Rings fandom engaging in cultured war campaigns. The article then goes into a lengthy spiel about Gamergate, before transitioning into a topic we know all too well here at Midnight's Edge. This feeling further solidified around the 2016 Ghostbusters reboot, a film that established a new continuity with female leads rather than revisiting old characters, due largely to Bill Murray's reluctance to film any of the proposed sequels at this point. This is an overt lie, one of several in this article, but is the first I can address without having the video deranked in the process. From the Sony leaks, we know that Bill Murray's reluctance had indeed caused earlier iterations of Ghostbusters 3 to not pick up the necessary momentum to get made. But it had nothing to do with the movie eventually becoming a female-centric reboot instead. No, that happened because Sony executive Amy Pascal was able to wrestle directing duties away from Ivan Reitman following the death of Harold Ramis. And she gave directing duties of what was to become Ghostbusters 3 to Paul Feig. But Paul Feig didn't want to do a Ghostbusters 3. He wanted to do one of his usual female-centric remake parodies instead. Amy Pascal loved the idea, and from that moment onwards, Ghostbusters 3 became Ghostbusters the female-centric remake. That's the reality of what happened there, and it had nothing to do with Bill Murray. The article then claims there was a coordinated effort to harm the movie's marketing and internet presence, and that it happened again on Star Wars. The article reads, "The Force Awakens was criticized for Rey, the new lead, being a Mary Sue, which resulted in a response suggesting double standards for female leads and male leads." Of course, the article does not develop this point any further, probably because you would be able to refute it if it did. So instead, it hurries into how badly Kelly Marie Tran and John Boyega were treated. What the article doesn't say, however, is that Kelly Marie Tran left Twitter due to pressure she got not from the fans, but from her peers in the industry, and the ones that Boyega later called out for sidelining his character weren't the fans, but Lucasfilm. Also, the article again claims The Last Jedi was review-bombed, but there is no evidence to support that. On the contrary, the early reviews for The Last Jedi were beyond stellar. The movie only started dropping hard once actual word-of-mouth hit. That is what the box office drop actually shows. But hey, never let the truth stand in the way of a good yarn, as a certain someone once said. The article then comes back full circle to the quote from the beginning. Evil is not able to create anything new. It can only distort and destroy what has been invented or made by the forces of good. But now, after taking you on that journey, the article is ready to conclude for you. Looking back over this potted history of entitled fan reactions, a recurring theme is a desire to keep things the same and avoid breaking new ground. Gamergate didn't want the perception of fandom to change, for games to change. The sick puppies wanted science fiction and fantasy to remain static. And right-wing Tolkien fans are harking back to a mythic version of the past because they don't like the present. We see this desire to see the same people's stories in Ghostbusters and Star Wars rather than take the series somewhere different, be it through the eyes of new people or to new planets. That this quote is being used would be a massive self-own if it weren't for the fact that this requires self-awareness. In actual reality, of course, the only one lacking self-awareness here, the only one self-owning, is this article's author, and Den of Geek for posting it in the first place. Let's see why by actually applying that quote to Ghostbusters and Star Wars respectively. Let's begin with Ghostbusters. Fans wanted a continuation of the original story, in which the old team trained a new generation. Instead, fans got a remake, one which retread old ground, disrespected the original movies and their fans, and it was soundly rejected by the audience. The problem wasn't review bombing, it was that relative to the high production cost, not enough people went to see it.
And Sony does not like to lose money. It made a lot of money around the world, but it just cost too much, making it economically not feasible to do another one. So it's too bad. The director, he spent too much on it, and he didn't shoot scenes we suggested to him. Several scenes that were going to be needed, and he said, no, we don't need them. And then we tested the movie, and they needed them, and he had to go back, and about 30 to 40 million in reshoots. So, yeah. Wow. So he will not be back on the Sony line anytime soon.
In the end, the Ghostbusters remake was a creative dead end, which nearly destroyed the franchise. I say nearly, because we recently got Ghostbusters Afterlife, the sequel that the fans wanted all along, and audiences embraced it. Unlike the remake, it left the doors wide open for future opportunities. While fans of the remake are only happy to label Afterlife as right-wing and something Trump would do. Applying the quote, "Evil is not able to create anything new, it can only distort and destroy what has been invented or made by the forces of good," leads to the only conclusion that it must have been the people behind the Ghostbusters remake which were evil. They were the ones that evidently couldn't create, only destroy. If anything, fans were correct in calling them out. The same goes for Star Wars, only even more so. The sequel trilogy is a creative dead end. It leads to nothing. There is no way forward from it. Bad Robot, the people behind it, could only destroy what others had created, all while bemoaning the fans liking the past of the franchise. Indeed, the explicit message of The Last Jedi was to bury the past, kill it if you have to, and they sure did that. But in the process, they also killed the franchise's future. Again, applying the quote, the people behind the Star Wars sequel trilogy must have been evil too, because as it turned out, they could only destroy, not create. Ironically, the only way forward for Star Wars right now is by Jon Favreau's The Mandalorian trying to bring the past back to life, after The Last Jedi tried to kill it. Come September 2nd, the premiere date for Amazon's The Rings of Power, and somewhat symbolically, the day that Tolkien died. I think you may come to find that that quote fits as well on the Amazon series as it does on Ghostbusters and Star Wars. Because despite what Den of Geek would have you believe, it is not the fans who are lacking self-awareness, it is publications like Den of Geek. In early January, Forbes published a piece titled, "Fans aren't gatekeeping anything, they're just wary of would-be dictators trying to take over their hobbies." And that's exactly right. Across the entirety of their article, Den of Geek doesn't actually say why you should watch The Rings of Power, other than that you are presumably a right-winger if you don't. But what are they? Where do they stand? That they conveniently do not say. With publications like Den of Geek defending it, are you more inclined to give The Rings of Power a chance? Let me know in the comments, and before you go, remember that to help bypass quarrelsome geo-blocking restrictions, you should get Surfshark VPN. Use our code MIDNIGHT to get 83% off, plus 3 extra months for free. Link is in the description.